People watching. Sometimes it can be a long wait for the number 22 bus. The route leads out of the downtown to the outskirts of the city, a neighborhood that had a lot of promise, but the construction in the suburbs was halted. The area where they were building used to be a landfill, and concerns over toxic and potentially flammable emissions put a stop to any plans for the neighborhood. The area is now lovingly referred to by locals as Garbage Mountain, though it's really just a small subdivision, backed by unfinished construction and a small hill. I sat on a cold bench inside a glass bus shelter, waiting for the bus. Around her, there were some traces of winter. Little mounds of snow sat here and there around the bus shelter, and slush lined the edge of the street, slowly melting its way into the sewers. Winter wasn't particularly bad here, compared to other parts of the country. She usually passed the time by writing in her book and people watching. Not many people diverted attention from their thoughts and personal problems to pay attention to a young 20-something girl sitting at a bus stop. With red streaks in her dark brown hair, multiple ear piercings, and a nose stud, one would think she'd draw at least a couple glances from corporate America. But this was predominantly a working town. Downtown, it seemed everyone had dyed hair and piercings. People watching was quite possibly one of I's favorite pastimes. She drew great pleasure from examining how people looked and acted, and creating grand ideas of what their lives were like. A man in a dark blue business coat passed by, carrying a black briefcase. His black hair was cut short, and there was just a hint of stubble on his face. His eyes were trained intently on the ground as he briskly walked past. A big-time investor, I thought. His name was Daniel. An investment banker that made a killing by purchasing a stock, then telling all his clients it was the next best thing, and cashing out. A real wolf. But he just found out his wife had been cheating on him for years. All the control he had felt in his life was suddenly threatened. Unsure of how to react, he tried to play it cool, but he hired a private detective to find the man his wife was cheating on him with. Armed with this information, he took the revolver he kept in the bottom drawer of his desk and placed it in his briefcase. Now, he's calmly storming towards his nemesis, eyes trained on the ground, so no outside force could sway him from his path. She smiled. But what if his nemesis knew he was coming, sitting in his stately manner, waiting for Daniel to knock at his door, pistol in hand? What if the whole thing had been set up from the beginning, so that he could finally get Daniel close enough to take care of him for good, and he and Daniel's wife could finally escape from this place and abscond to a houseboat in Greece with the insurance money? Daniel would never see it coming. I giggled slightly to herself as she made a note in the margins of her diary to work on the story sometime. For a moment, she fantasized about houseboats in Greece. An approaching bus snapped her attention back to the real world. She shoved her book into her bag and stepped out of the shelter as the bus stopped. As she boarded the bus, the driver said to her, "Good afternoon, Ms. I." "Hey, Michael," I replied. She dropped some coins into the fare box. "Busy day?" "As always. You writing more stories about people?" "Always, Michael." "Now when you gonna write something about me?" I considered the thought for a moment. I just don't know that much about bus drivers." Michael narrowed his eyes as he pulled the bus away from the stop. "Oh, us bus drivers are very romantic people. Wine, dinner, all that." I couldn't help but laugh. She turned to find a seat. "Sure, Michael. I'll write you into an epic romantic bus driver fairy tale." "You better," Michael shouted back at her, then laughed to himself. As I sat down in a vacant seat, she placed her book bag on her lap. After a few moments of consideration, she took out her book and began to write. "There once was a man named Michael.